Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see you all here. I'll be talking about the case for radical human intelligence enhancement. So I'll start off by briefly defining what intelligence is, why it's useful at the individual level, the level of countries, and at the global level, and also explore some, in my opinion, underexplored applications it has to the themes discussed at Italia, including existential risks, the great stagnation, and even how it relates to life extension and the task of solving that problem. Okay, yeah, let's go. What is intelligence? I think these are the most representative definitions I'm familiar with. Linda Gottfredson is a noted intelligence researcher. I think hers is the standard academic definition. The ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, learn from experience. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. I think Jean Piaget is more poetic. Intelligence is what you need when you don't know what to do. So, gets to the point. And the third one from Arthur Jensen in the G Factor, like one of the seminal books in the field, is even more poetic. And he heard a noted historian claim that it was by virtue of the very different gifts that Caesar became a great commander, Shakespeare a great poet, and Newton a great scientist. Dr. Johnson replied, "No, it is only that one man has more mind than another. He may direct it differently or prefer this study to that. Sir, the man who has vigor may walk to the north as well as to the south, to the east as well as to the west." This, in my opinion, is sort of like a very poetic expression of the idea of the G factor, which we'll come to just now. So, this is Intelligence Research 101. Just to be explicit, there's nothing controversial here. This is the mainstream view in psychometrics. So, Linda Gottfredson, Mainstream Science and Intelligence, an editorial with 52 signatories from 1994. These like 7 statements are, I think, an encapsulation of what intelligence is about. First, it's something that can actually be rigorously and quite reliably measured. There's a lot of agreement between different measurements of intelligence. The spread of people across the IQ continuum follows a normal curve, or the so-called bell curve. All cognitive abilities load on a common factor of intelligence, and this is known as the general factor. That is, somebody who is good at, for instance, rotating shapes in their mind, or knows a lot of vocabulary. Those things are typically correlated, and from this matrix of correlations, you come to this statistical method called factor analysis. Factor analysis draw out the G factor of intelligence. Now, the G factor doesn't explain everything. There's obviously some areas in which people do worse or better, and even subcomponents. These are referred to as specific abilities. But the main point is that you can have a single number that's highly explanatory and is a very good proxy for what we understand as intelligence. The fourth main important thing to note is that the G factor is universal across human cultures, not just amongst different groups in the West, but it was found in non-Western cultures as well, even in amongst tribal peoples. And there's even been studies amongst animals, chimps, dogs, Rosalind Arden, and even Telios fish, which showed a G factor for animal intelligence as well. So it's pretty universal. The fifth one is that the heritability of intelligence is very high. The most modern estimates converge to around 0.7, 0.8. And the sixth point is that it's by far the most well-replicated branch of the psychological sciences. Many of you are probably familiar with the so-called replication crisis in sociology and psychology, to a lesser extent in economics, although economics is more rigorous. But it hasn't really been affected. It hasn't really affected intelligence research, and this is actually something that Steven Pinker has pointed out as well. Replicability crisis in psychology doesn't apply to IQ. Huge ends, replicable results, but people hate the message. And the seventh point, which is what I'm now going to subsequently explore, is that it is strongly predictive of individual life success, and it's very strongly predictive of positive group outcomes, such as GDP per capita and innovation and all these other sort of like good things that we as a society want. Now, just as a quick aside, as I said, this is pretty mainstream. You can copy this text, ask ChatGPT. It had some quibbles, but it said it needed more nuance, more details, but it agreed with this list. And one thing I would note is that there are some sort of reputational associations that intelligence research has. But there have been opinion polls, expert polls of intelligence researchers, and the common denominator seems to be that their median position is classical liberal, relatively pro-free markets, very socially liberal, but more anti-immigration than most amongst their class, I think, but otherwise not far right, not far left. And in fact, historically, both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were pretty hostile to intelligence research. The Nazis viewed it as a Jewish trick, and the communists viewed it as a bourgeois ploy. So again, even historically, there were different people. Karl Pearson, a major figure in that, was a outright socialist. So again, there's no sort of clear ideological sort of tilt here. At the level of the individual, intelligence is very strongly associated with success. Here are some graphs from the bell curve. Just to quickly list them. Lifetime income, education, so the probability that you will drop out of high school or get out of college degree. That's like here. The lines in black, they refer to IQ, from very low to standard deviations below, to high to standard deviations above. And the gray line is the parental socioeconomic status. So as you can see, from these graphs, which are in the bell curve, the IQ is more explanatory than parental SES. And again, crime and prison, probability of getting into prison. Here's the criminality curve. Again, you have a steeper decline with IQ than with socioeconomic status of the parents. Highly correlated with job performance, 0.4. Politics under any regime, for that matter. The average IQ of US congressmen, I think there was a study about this by Jonathan Y. It was 120 or 125 on average. At the Nuremberg trials of Nazi German war criminals, again, the average was 120 or so. So again, it doesn't really matter whether it's a democracy you're talking about or Nazism or communism or whatever. Generally speaking, political elites will be smarter than average because, again, that sort of being politically successful is just another aspect of what is called life success. You have more geniuses at high IQ levels. I think that's self-explanatory. To be a genius, you also need to have a set of personality traits like nonconformism, some degree of disagreeableness, and so on. So it's more of a complex structure than just low IQ. But I mean, obviously, below some threshold, it's pretty hard to master the big number of areas that you need to be a genius. There's a positive correlation with health and longevity. And what's interesting is that people remark that smart people are happier, or smart people have more mental issues, but that doesn't seem to be true. I mean, if you look at the literature, my personal opinion actually is that people who are smart but have mental peculiarities, they're just more noticeable because like their weirdness stands out relative to their intellect. This is where you get the stereotype of the eccentric, like the English eccentric, for instance. And I think it's basically just a function of people who are smart but weird. They're sort of like their weirdness is remarked upon a lot. But although there's a sort of a respectable correlation between life success and intelligence, it's like you can be intelligent, but you can have personality defects or problems, or you could have just bad luck. And so the correlation between life success and IQ is around 0.4. But when you consider groups, then those correlations become a lot stronger. And here you can see this is the national IQ, and as proxied from the PISA International Standardized Tests. Compiled this chart several years ago. And this is the GDP per capita on the y-axis. And the correlation between GDP per capita and national IQ is around 0.7. But the remarkable thing is that when you remove two groups of outliers, these are the countries denoted in red. These are countries with a communist legacy, who spent a large part of the 20th century under central planning. And the black squares, which are major oil or resource exporters. So the communist countries, they're significantly poorer than predicted by the national IQ. The resource exporters, to the contrary, are much richer than predicted by the IQ. And I think this sort of like a simple, I mean, you can do regression analyses and so on to like figure out this objection to this idea, which is that correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. And it's been consistently found that national IQ is indeed the single best predictor of wealth. But the fact of these two exceptions, in my opinion, just serve to like really illustrate it in more intuitive terms. If you're a normal capitalist country, your wealth can be predicted from your national IQ. If you spent under bad economic management, you're poorer. This is China. It spent 30 years under Maoism. Maoism was like bizarre even by the standards of centrally planned regimes. You had a significantly greater chance of dying on the job than getting fired during the Maoist era in China. So yeah, underperforming. But by the same token, when China liberalized its markets, it started famously growing by 10% per year. Whereas countries which are lower in IQ, like even those that sort of like liberalize themselves, they're not growing very fast. Like if you look at just like the outliers, this is Ukraine, this is Armenia. Now, obviously, being invaded by Russia or being invaded by Azerbaijan isn't very conducive to economic growth. So they're sort of like big outliers even by the standards of the post-socialist world. This is Russia over here. It's probably closer here because apart from having a communist legacy, it does also have oil, like quite a lot of oil. So, and if you look at conversely at those countries, like that's Qatar, right at the top, that's Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. What do they all have in common? A lot of oil per capita to export, which makes them artificially high. By the way, some country like Equatorial Guinea, which is a sub-Saharan African country, would be somewhere around here. So, yeah, again, this sort of like just the sheer consistency of it. Yeah, that's the United States. It's richer than the EU and Japan. Why? Well, I mean, there's several explanations you can posit. The US has big economies of scale. It has an integrated market, whereas the EU market is less integrated. But it also draws a large percentage of the world's smart actions, and it's actually been found that the average IQ of the top 5% of the population is more explanatory than just the average. So yeah, perhaps the fact that the US and Israel, for that matter, outperform their national IQ, like what could just be predicted. So like the relative outliers. Here's Israel, here's the US. Could also be just because they have a disproportionate number of very smart people. Now, there's been other explanations that have been proposed for this, such as education spending. Well, as I said, like those oil exporters, they can spend a lot of money on education because they get a lot of resource rents, but that isn't sort of like having a big effect on moving them to the right side of the curve. So that doesn't to be education does have a positive effect on IQ, but it's the most of the causation is towards the other in the other direction. Institutions, I mean, when institutions are really bad, like under central planning, like North Korea, for instance, I mean, obviously, North Korea, South Korea, they're basically one people. The fact that North Korea is vastly poorer than South Korea is because of Chuche and like this sort of like centrally planned military first weird system of political economy. But I mean, to create these sort of differences, there's only one North Korea at this point. There's also Cuba, Venezuela, I suppose. But you can't really, I mean, these are basically meme countries. Socialism has lost the ideological battle. And as institutions converge to best practice, the explanatory power of institutions at explaining the main differences continues to fall. And I mean, I'd even point out something like the difference between Chile and Argentina. Very similar GDP per capita, although Argentina famously has extremely bad institutions, regulations, 250% inflation rate, whereas Chile traditionally has been, after Pinochet, a relatively well-managed economy, but more or less the same GDP per capita. So. You can look at other things like time preference, altruism, levels of trust. Kierkegaard and I wrote a paper on this. Again, we found the usual pattern, which is that IQ was more explanatory. Now, why would this be the case? I think the best explanation for this was by a guy called Gareth Jones. He's a professor at GMU. So as you know, GMU attracts a lot of these libertarian professors who are very interesting thinkers. Kaplan, Robin Hanson, and so on, who was with us, were all both with us a few weeks ago. And Gareth Jones's big idea was the Oling theory. And it's basically this idea that any economy has two components. There's the foolproof sector, which is bus drivers, garbage men, utility workers, waitresses, taxi drivers, jobs where performance improves by IQ but doesn't make any cardinal difference. And then there's the Oling sector, which is where you actually need to fulfill a complex production process correctly in order to get a finished product. So if you have like a complex modern production process, then for it to be internationally competitive, it includes many steps, and each step has to be reliably fulfilled. So what are examples of the Oling sector? It's things like a complex merger and acquisition, a hard medical operation, like a movie, blockbuster movie, or a nuclear submarine, or a semiconductor factory. So basically these complicated things, and for all of these steps to be fulfilled correctly and for the resulting product to be successful at a sufficiently high percentage of the time, all these steps have to be reliably fulfilled. And for that you need some level of some sufficiently high level of national IQ for that to work. And when you produce these widgets, they fetch much more on the international market because there's many fewer people at the global level who can produce them. However, people who do work in the holding sector, they can always move to the foolproof sector and back. So there's an open market between them, an open labor market. And this is why a hairdresser in, say, Denmark gets 10 times as much money on average than a hairdresser in Nigeria, for instance, because anybody in the holding sector can, in principle, move to the foolproof sector, and there is salaries there. It's basically this principle where rising tide lifts all boats. So this is the theoretical explanation for why countries with higher national IQs are much richer than countries with low IQs. And unsurprisingly, there's also a very strong relationship between intelligence and innovation. I think the best metric of innovation is the Nature Index. Basically, it's a tally of publications in the world's 50 or 70 most prestigious science journals. So, as you can see, it's pretty much the North America, the EU, Japan, South Korea, and China is beginning to become pretty prominent. So this is a per capita map.
And French Guyana too, for some reason. What's up with that?
Yeah. Yeah, you have the really important observation is that basically something like 95% literally of elite science production accrues to the developed world, what we can denote as the high IQ countries in general. So the United States, as of 2018, accounted for about a third of it. The old European Union, that is excluding new members, was 26%. East Asia as a whole was 27%, with China at 18%, Japan like 5%, if I recall correctly. And as you can see, the most of the rest of the world is more or less an afternote. Eastern Europe less than 2%, India 2%, Latin America 1%, Islamic world 1%, Sub-Saharan Africa 0.2%. And again, we had a paper on this, and the strongest predictor was again national IQ. Although there was also again the strong influence of countries with a communist legacy, they underperform what would be expected, you would expect of them in a pretty significant fashion. So this is China over here. That's the US, that circle. If you look at it in logarithmic format, you see that it's sort of like there's a direct relationship between national IQ and innovation. And from this, it seems to follow that if you could increase your national IQ, you'll also get more innovation, which seems to be particularly germane to the topics discussed at Italia, because there are some concerns that we could be facing a great stagnation. And now we'll sort of move to that later. But first, I want to discuss the trends we're seeing in IQ. These are described for the most part by two trends: the Flynn effect and the Woodley effect. The Flynn effect is the trend of secular IQ increases we've seen throughout the 20th century. Why did the Flynn effect occur? We think it was because of a mixture of better nutrition, better schooling, and more exposure to abstract concepts. Furthermore, the gap between the developed world and the developing world has been slowly narrowing, at least since international standardized tests started being conducted systemically from around 2000, which is approximately what you would expect because the environment is worse in the developing countries, but it's also that also means that there's scope to improve it. And they are improving it, whereas the developed world has largely maxed out these possibilities. People are already going to school. There's already universal schooling, including universal secondary schooling. Nutrition is already a solved problem. If anything, the problem is that people are too fat, and life is very, very abstract, very digitized. So there's nothing very surprising about that. Here you have a chart of the Flynn effect over the 20th century, but unfortunately, I don't think I included this chart, but yeah, since 2000, since about 2000, there's been increasing evidence that the Flynn effect in the developed world has stalled, and actually some evidence, including from Germany and more recently from PISA, that it has gone into outright decline. And why would we expect that in the long term? Well, because on average, as I said, IQ is heritability is 0.8, and on average, you have people who are less smart. They have on average more surviving children than people who are more smart. And again, there's been some studies about this. There was a meta-analysis which found that for the US and the UK, it was minus 0.4 IQ points per decade, predicted decline from this kind of negative selection. In Iceland, they have a big biobank that covers a lot of the Icelandic population, so they could actually look at the incidence of genetic variants associated with intelligence, derive a polygenic score for intelligence, and graph it over time. And it's kind of been going down for many decades at around minus 0.3 points per decade. So that's not a big deal if it's a decade or two, but over a century could become a problem. And just a month ago, Seb Jensen wrote a very big sort of like study of estimated dysgenic decline in countries around the world, and his finding was that on average the decline was 0.35 points per decade, and this was actually worse in the developing world, which kind of actually does make sense because in the developing world you have rapid urbanization, so you have people moving to the cities where fertility is a lot lower, and these are usually smarter people. People who remain in the countryside, they are less ambitious, less smart on average, but they also retain additional values to a great extent than people who move to the urban areas. So basically this effect is actually strong in many developing nations. Now I'm probably not much time to go into the other stuff, but this sort of topic is actually interesting because it seems that dysgenic decline seems to have begun after the Industrial Revolution, generally speaking. It seems to have begun in the UK since the late 19th century, for instance. This wasn't actually the case in prior centuries because people who had more children in the Malthusian era than they could support, their extra children either died or they could not afford to have children of their own. So there was one economist called Anatoly Karlin who actually made a very large study of this based on the incidence of surnames. He found out that a disproportionate number of modern Britons are descended from what would have been the bourgeoisie or the nobility around 1500 or 1600. So basically the peasants and like urban workers of 1600 have left a much weaker genetic trace in the modern British ancestry than have the bourgeoisie. So he has this theory that there was for several centuries a so-called farewell to arms effect, where genotypic IQ was actually rising for several centuries, and you could actually even speculate that this might have perhaps explained the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution eventually, but this is more speculative. It's something that you need to do more research in to disentangle the influence of other factors such as rising literacy rates and so on. And yeah, another sort of like interesting thing is that this might not have always been the case. Classical Greece and Rome may actually have actually seen dysgenic reproduction as well, as opposed to the farewell of balance effect we saw in early modern England. There's a paper by David Gifford where he looked at some genomes from ancient Greece and actually did notice a decline between modern Greeks and ancient Greeks. But this is the samples were small, so you can't make strong predictions. Right. So yeah, just to summarize, the Flynn effect was acting for the past century, and IQs rose because of that, because the environment just became a lot better for fostering high IQs. But at the same time, you had negative selection against IQ at the genomic level, and since the Flynn effect seems to now be maxed out, the so-called Woodley effect now predominates, especially in the developed world. Considering the relationship between high IQ individuals and innovation, that doesn't seem to portend well for our future prospects. And things get worse. Here's Chainlink founder Nazarov. It's a meme. You know, why are the link marines called the marines? Because they're always underwater. Anyway, crypto Twitter joke. Robin Hanson, in his talk about the Great Stagnation, he was emphasizing the fertility collapse, that fertility rates are falling, and so you will have less people coming into the workforce, which has downstream effects on economic growth and eventually innovation. But that's not the whole of it, because you have other like negative factors as well. You have the negative selection against for IQ, which I talked about in the previous slide. This is, by the way, Seb Jensen's estimates for different countries. Like, some countries don't actually seem to be declining at all, or like very much. So that's Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries. They're sort of like more or less neutral now. But some countries are seeing half an IQ point decline per decade estimated. But anyway, not just a matter of falling quantities, but also a matter of falling quality potentially. Another problem that has been discussed a lot in previous lectures is that you have diminishing returns to investment in innovation. You have Edom's law. You need to have more R&D spending and researchers to generate new drugs. It's sort of like a down-only kind of line. Another sort of like more fundamental problem is that discoveries tend to get harder with time. It was easier to master all of the mathematical and physics corpus in, say, the 17th century than it is today. Now you just have to study something for 20 years before you can actually start contributing. If you're talking about some area of math, like Andy Wiles, for instance, he penned the solution to the Fermat theorem only in his 40s, which is basically you had to like really delve into the material a lot more than people who were doing this even just a century ago. And the final problem is that this might need a trigger warning for the libertarians amongst you. But our institutions are actually relatively good right now, so they're better than they used to be. So this is an index of economic freedom over time. This was the era after the depression. Like, economic freedom collapsed then during communism, but then it started increasing again, and now it's at all-time highs. Like, literally, the world has never been freer in economic terms. Now, obviously, there's still complaints about the FDA and so on, and this is why you have movements such as Vitalia and charter cities and pop-up cities and decentralized governance and so on. And obviously, I support all of it. But these things increasingly have marginal effects. So it's not exactly like going from North Korea or the Soviet Union, say, to the United States in terms of the economic freedoms and scientific freedoms you'll get develop here. This is a graph of corruption, the number of percentage of firms reporting that they had that bureaucrats demanded a bribe from them. These are like the 2000s, and this is 2015. So as you can see, the number of firms saying that reporting pressure from bureaucrats to give them bribes collapsed by 50%. So yeah, I mean, the world is actually becoming quite a lot better, but technological progress outside the areas of software and AI especially is continues to slow down. This suggests there might be more fundamental problems, which is that there's not much scope to further improve institutions, and a lot of the most obvious and easiest things have already been discovered. I mean, we're in quite a pickle then, declining average IQ and declining numbers of new workers, the fertility collapse, not really much scope for further improving institutions. So how can we square the circle? I think the most interesting and impactful way you can realistically do this is by increasing IQ, by trying to increase the intelligence levels. As I said, there's not much scope for doing this via more education or by feeding people better, because again, this has been largely maxed out. But you could edit the genome of humans to make them smarter, or at least make new generations smarter. Now, at Vitalia, there have been several individuals and teams who have talked about various approaches to this. So, Jonathan Anomaly is interested in embryo selection for IQ. He can say more about that himself. He didn't want his talk recorded, so I will sort of refrain from going into the details, but that's the most obvious and prospective path. With current approaches, you could have an expected IQ boost of up to 6 to 7 IQ points when selecting from 10 embryos with the current level of understanding, which is already a very big difference, and one that will, if it becomes widespread, actually totally dominate the 0.3 IQ point loss per decade we're seeing. Another approach is adult gene editing. Ben Korpan, Chase Denneker. Again, you can sort of talk to them. They have a very comprehensive, less long article about their proposed approach. You have Max Perry, who was here a month ago talking about synthetic embryos. And there's also obviously the augmentation lab at the beach house. Kazakhs, Rochelle, Frazier is here. Hello, Frazier. Yeah. Sort of like a more Deus Ex kind of approach, Neuralink, and so on. Personally, I'm a bit more skeptical about the potential of this approach to directly increase intelligence, but best of luck to them. Hope it works out as well. And then there's sort of like various sci-fi things you could do. Embryo editing for IQ, iterated embryo selection, which is where you basically compact multiple generations into like a very constrained area of time. So basically have several generations of selection for higher IQ within like when you're producing a new embryo. You have de novo DNA synthesis, where you just build it from scratch. I mean, that's very sci-fi by this point. Like even more speculatively, you could have transgenics. Like random interesting fact, the corvid family, magpies, ravens, and crows, their neuronal density is twice that of humans. So they have a very small brain, like a peanut-sized brain, but they're very smart. So as you probably know, crows can recognize up to 100 human faces. and they react to them. They can solve problems, like if they have a bottle of water and some teeth that they like in the water, they can figure out that you can throw rocks into the bottle of water so as to raise the level of the water and get that snack. So they're pretty intellectual birds. So if you could sort of like get some corvid neurons into your brain, then who knows what will happen. Or alternatively, get human neurons into an elephant brain because it's got like a really huge skull. So what would an elephant with a like human neurons do? Because you know, there's the human brain is to a large extent just an upscaled chimp brain to a very large extent. So I mean, if you could do that, then you could like have some fascinating things happening. But yeah, I mean, this is sci-fi. Those are the sort of like the more realistic near-term approaches. Just to recap, why would we want to go ahead with this? I think you can split this into three main bins. At the individual level, you have an ethical concept called procreative beneficence. Jonathan Anomaly has a book, The Creating Future People, where he goes on at length about specifically the ethics of creating future people. But the basic point of procreative beneficence is that with the technology more or less within our grasp, it seems to me that the main bioethical concern should be not with plowing ahead with it, but by not plowing ahead with it, you deprive future individuals, future humans, of what would otherwise be better and more interesting lives. So really, I think the onus should be on the bioconservatives to address that question. I also think that there's a powerful intersection with the main theme of Vitaly, which is radical life extension. One common argument against life extension is that you have the risk of stagnation. Science progresses by one funeral at a time. So if you like make people live forever, but you don't solve the problem of increasing their neuroplasticity and capacity to learn and change their mind, then this would be pretty bad, because then you could have basically this sort of like eternal gerontocracy, which basically kills any new ideas. Now, obviously I don't buy into this argument, but in the event that it is an issue, intelligence enhancement would probably play a relatively critical role in restoring neuroplasticity, so that these old fogies, but in young bodies, rejuvenated bodies don't hold things back. It's also a clear answer to the wouldn't you get bored question, which is another objection people raise to life extension. I think if you're smarter, your life is more interesting on average, because then you could just learn a lot more things and have more interesting interactions. And the final thing is that you have these sort of like very vague objections to life extension, to the point that it undermines human dignity. It sort of like man was made in God's given image and given 20 score and 10 years to live. Now, obviously, I'm not a fan of these, and my sort of standard response to these objections is Patrick Hayden's very good quote. Personally, I've been hearing all my life about the serious philosophical issues posed by life extension, and my attitude has always been that I'm willing to grapple with those issues for as many centuries as it takes. I would address criticisms of serious philosophical issues around intelligence enhancement in a similar method. Is that to have this debate in a serious and proper way, we first have to become much smarter. The third bin is that the second major point and case for intelligence enhancement, nuclearization, is that it has even better effects at the group level. I mean, I discussed again before that intelligence is not as predictive of life success, but it's extremely predictive of group and national success. Now, there's some things to take away. National power. The more bioconservative countries will fall behind if this becomes a big thing. Now, assuming that the AIs don't come, AGIs don't come like within a decade or so, and transcenders or kill us all. But just assuming that AI doesn't reach AGI, ASI levels within like short timelines, then I think this like the pace at which different countries start intelligence enhancement would have a big impact. And there's some interesting patterns here, by the way. This chart at the right shows the percentage of people in different countries who support gene editing for making babies more intelligent. So this is Europe. Europeans are skeptical, so UK is 12%, Russia is 18%, Italy is 13%. Yeah, they don't like this. And the US doesn't actually much like it either, 17%. I think it's mostly two branches of thought that militate against this. First, it's the religious bioconservatives. The second one are egalitarians and woke people who are afraid of the impact this might have on equality and so on. But as you can see, some of the like the third world countries are actually a lot more bullish on it. India being especially impressive, with 64% of Indians supporting editing babies for intelligence. So that seems to be pretty bullish for India, actually. Incidentally, China seems to be pretty skeptical as well. China isn't on this poll, but there was a poll in China several years ago, and only 25% of them were supportive of it, which is sort of goes against stereotypes of the Chinese as technophiles and so on, but non-Judeo-Christians. But those are the numbers. So. But even apart from considerations of national power, even at the global level, the world will be a poorer, less functional, and more crime-ridden one without human intelligence enhancement. Whereas a world with many more smart people, well, I mean, there's a society called the Triple Nine Society, which is like the most selective society for IQ. It's only those with more than 150 are accepted there. Now, obviously, there's some selection effects because the type of people who would join such a society are not exactly standard amongst very smart people. But I do think that it's pretty plausible that, on average, people who are extremely smart will be biased towards three markets: social liberalism, bioliberalism, cosmopolitanism, technophilia, and most of them would avoid identity politics, such as wokeness or like extreme right-wing kind of ideas. And at least there was a poll of Triple Nine Society members, and those are the sort of like the general principles that they elucidated politically. And I think this kind of thing describes the Italian demographic. You see, it's congruent with the Italian demographic as well. And the final case for nuclearization is that I think that it can have extremely good effects on our ability to cope with existential risks. Now, Robin Hanson, again, to reiterate, was saying that there could be a great stagnation because unless we get AGI within the next 60 to 90 years, according to him, then the fertility collapse could mean that the innovation dies out, basically, and we get several centuries of technological dark ages, essentially. Now, I have a sort of like a slightly different model. I think the fertility collapse will sort of reverse itself because fertility preferences are also heritable. But that's sort of like a not a super consequential difference because in sort of like my model, the dysgenic, the negative selection IQ plays an explicit role, and that also eventually leads to stagnation, long-term stagnation, in the absence of, again, obviously in the absence of AI. But even if we do get AGI, I mean, I think most people here are techno-optimists, but I mean, I'm sort of not fully sold on this because, again, the things that an AGI will optimize for will not necessarily be what sort of humans would want to optimize for. And they're going to be optimizing at a rate that's thousands or millions of times faster than any biological system. So I'm relatively actually agnostic on whether the AIs make us into gods or killers, or like have some Dapchip scenario where they just sort of vanish and things go on as usual while they sort of like create their own civilization in space or underground or whatever. I mean, I don't think anybody can in principle predict what a super intelligence would do. It's sort of like one of those things, like any sufficiently advanced technology is magic, and any sufficiently smart AGI or ASI is a god. So how can you explain what a god would do? But for what it's worth, Eliza Yudkowsky, who's the high priest of the AI dualism, he actually seems to explicitly support human intelligence enhancement. Because, well, yeah, that's his tweet. If humanity woke up tomorrow and decided to live anyways, it would do what it could to shut down AI, and B, launch clash programs to augment human intelligence and suicide volunteers in hopes they could solve alignment in those 6 years. Now, he has very short timelines, so he sort of like wants to rush things. Well, I don't know how realistic that is, but at any rate, it can't hurt. Like if the if AI timelines are short, and if AI is going to kill us, then there's not much we can do anyway. Like all the life extension stuff you lot are doing, I mean, that's pretty pointless as well in the big picture. However, if the AI timelines are long, then just as it would be good to have life extension, well, for self-interested reasons, amongst others, because we kind of don't want to die. So it would also be a good idea to really start enhancing human intelligence as well, especially since it takes 15, 20, 25 years for embryos to grow up and start contributing to science. Now, there is a possibility that the current generation of people are simply too dumb. There's not enough very smart people, or maybe the threshold for solving these problems is just beyond the baseline human level, like the current baseline human level, to solve these things in principle. Things like life extension, like maybe probably they now thinks we'll get there by 2036, 2039. Others think it's still many decades away. But at any rate, if we also increase intelligence, this would sort of be an additional guarantee or insurance against the current generation of people failing at life extension. It would also, again, AI alignment is probably an extremely difficult problem. The coordination mechanism, it's one thing to solve AI alignment, but how do you also make sure that people coordinate on alignment? I mean, these are non-trivial issues, and smarter people would have a bigger chance of solving it. Now, as I'm sure all of you would agree, even radical life extension, the situation is drastically better than it was several years ago. Like a decade ago, Aubrey de Grey was going to small meetups in the Bay Area and begging $1 million, so like several $100,000 for the Sense Foundation. And now you have companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars, like Calico and Jello and so on, to advance life extension. So obviously there's been some sea change in funding for life extension, even though like in any rational world it would be at least 10 times higher still. But the quantities are big. Current market cap of Beta Tau is 30 million the last time I checked. So again, it sort of like exists and it's funding interesting projects. Whereas intelligence enhancement, which in my opinion is no less of an important issue, there's almost certainly less than 100 people working on it around the world. There's perhaps 200 or 300 professional psychometrics intelligence researchers in the world, like if you look at the attendance of ESEED. But who of them, what percentage of them are actively working on intelligence enhancement? Well, I mean, you can pretty much count them on the fingers of your hands. And how much money are they getting? Well, I mean, it's sort of like in its most like earliest phases right now. Basically, I think that this entire sector is where perhaps life extension was a decade ago, and as such, it makes sense to try to accelerate this so that instead of 20 or 40 people working on it with maybe $10 million between them, they could at least get to the kinds of of scales that radical life extension currently enjoys, which is up to 5% of VC investment now goes to life extension related companies within biotech. At least that's the figure I remember from one of the talks at the conferences. And this sort of relates to my main project right now, which is the NOEMA DAO, a DAO to fund investment into and fundamental research into human intelligence enhancement. Basically, do for this sector what VitaDAO is doing for life extension, what ClearDAO is doing for cryonics, what AthenaDAO is doing for women's fertility, what ValleyDAO is doing for synthetic biology. So yeah, around the NOEMA DAO, I've sort of wrote down some statements, some ideas, some concepts that are related to its mission, to its purpose, to its raison d'être. So fundamental research, enhancing the hive mind, achieving noetic escape velocity, kind of like a similar concept to longevity escape velocity that I'm developing. Like avoiding the new dark ages and avoiding AI doom. Public goods funding, such as open biobanks, so segregated and restrictive biobanks are a very big problem right now, because to find the genes, the variants associated with intelligence, you preferably need hundreds of thousands of samples at the least, as well as very good data, at least educational attainment, but better direct IQ tests, so that you can sort of identify the variants responsible and the effect sizes more reliably. And the absence of open biobanks is currently a big problem. This concept of procreative beneficence we discussed, perhaps early access for staking NOEMA, and solving all the other problems such as radical life extension, opening up the space to crypto investors. One of the common questions asked here, what would you do if you were to live for 1,000 years or for 10,000 years? There were like various things like learn all the languages, visit all the countries, rule a galaxy, whatever. But are you smart enough to rule a galaxy if you have like an IQ of 130 or something? I think you could do with something more like 300 just for starters. And the other sort of like really big selling point for having a DAO within the space, in my opinion, is that what all these things have in common, like especially life extension, is that it's a bit politically controversial, because you have bioconservatives who oppose it, and you have egalitarians who are sort of concerned about the social ramifications where richer people start living a lot longer. At least at the start. I mean, over time, these costs will rapidly plummet, I expect, but and I mean, all of these things apply, but 10 times as bad to intelligence because of its sort of like mostly unfair associations that it has with the actually ideologies. So I think that the decentralized approach might be especially relevant in what is otherwise a politically controversial sector. And just to wrap things up, thanks for being here, by the way. And yeah, if you want to learn more about this, I think if you want to do this in depth, there's really no alternative, in my opinion, to actually reading books, even in the social media age. And if I was to recommend 3 books in particular, I would recommend Russell Warren's In the Know, which is a recent book, relatively recent, 2021, I think. And it's a very comprehensive sort of, he comprehensively addresses all the 35 myths around intelligence, and basically explains that slide I had at the beginning, but in much greater detail, with more in the way of numbers and statistics. The second book I would recommend is Scarlett Jones' Hive Mind, which is about the interrelationship between national IQ and national success and economic growth and so on. And the third book I would recommend is Jonathan Anomalies, Creating Future People, which is the flow enhancement, bioethics of flow enhancement. Currently it's actually free on Amazon for what it's worth, but I would recommend waiting until April for the second edition. Some of the books I would recommend is obviously The Bell Curve and The G Factor, both classics, although they're much older. Bell Curve, I mean, like 1990s. So, but I mean, the basic science hasn't really changed, and they are classics for a reason. So, but they are pretty big, and the G Factor in particular is pretty technical. So, if you're interested, go for it. And Lindemann's Cognitive Capitalism is a more technical version of the hive mind. In many ways, it's actually better, I think, but the problem is that Lindemann didn't get a good editor, and he is German, and his English isn't very good, so the book is kind of does need some editing. But nonetheless, it's sort of like very valuable if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of the relationship between economics and IQ. And some blogs I would recommend: Parchesia.com, Craig Willie, Genetic Choice Project, geneticchoiceproject.com, Emil Kierkegaard's probably the most productive psychometrics blogger right now, and through Kierkegaard you will also discover all the other bloggers: Noah Carroll and Bo Weingart, Aporia Magazine, aporiamagazine.com. And as for what I'm doing in particular, I plan to write the book. I mean, I've already started writing it, the Biosingularity, which expands the main themes of this talk into a book format. I hope that it will come out this year, and the idea is to provision an accompanying ideology for human intelligence enhancement to go with Noima DAO. I have a blog at newsalvation.com. Feel free to check it out. I only started, I mean, I've been blogging for a long time, but I've only resumed recently. I don't have much there yet, but I will be blogging actively from now on. And yeah, if you want to discuss any particular issues with me, that's my Telegram, Karlin. And yes, that's it. Hope you've learned something from this talk, and hope you sort of accompany me on the route to the glorious consolidationist future. Thank you.
Hey, great talk as always. So, so the DAO, I love the idea, but maybe we can think of some ways for there to be a return on investment. So that's one of the appealing features of VitaDAO and related BioDAOs. So currently are there enough IQ enhancement related companies out there to invest in? We know several that you mentioned. But would it be a diversified portfolio? And aside from them, are there other ways that you can get a return on investment outside of just investing in this type of company?
Yeah. I'm at the early stages of planning the DAO, and I would greatly appreciate all of your input. But yes, the main ideas I've had are not particularly smart or groundbreaking. It's to invest in existing companies, which are in the early stages right now. So if they take off, the returns could be consist of several orders of magnitude worth of returns on investment. The second idea is to offer the opportunity to stake Noima tokens in return for discounts or subsidized access to those treatments when they do become available, which I believe Vita is actually doing something similar. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Access to events and other services.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't have super smart. I mean, my IQ isn't sort of like super high, so yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah. Well, one thing that could be cool, I mean, we can brainstorm on this, but actually getting people access to high-quality, well-validated IQ tests. I mean, I'd like to test my own. Friends would probably like to test ours, but we can't trust the ones that we get easy access to on the internet, so maybe some psychology department can do it like a well-normed test for a large group of us.
Oh yeah, IQ testing lab here at
Yeah.
Próspera. Yeah, cool idea.
Another small idea is you could set up a little hedge fund, like a global macro type fund, because in that sort of efficient frontier, there are some countries that are underperforming, and if statism or communism is kind of waning, you would expect them to catch up to the rest of the frontier, and so you could go long those countries and go short the countries that are, beyond the frontier.
Yeah, yeah.
But it might take too long, sort of time horizon.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've heard similar ideas from Steve Saylor on his blog for like the past decade, that you just sort of like invest into countries that are underperforming relative to the IQ. But yeah, I mean, the main problem there is that they're usually underperforming for a reason, and you sort of like have to identify the political shifts that would sort of have to occur for them to start performing much better.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, that's also a cool idea. Thank you.
Did you have a question here?
Hey, that was great. That was an awesome talk. Just following up on the IQ test point, I guess more of a like selfish question, but when I've been hiring in the past and stuff, I've done this in previous job applications. Do you have any suggestions on like what the best sort of IQ test or style of IQ test would be to give someone if you're looking for just early stage startups, right? Looking for G factor, smart generalist people, and like selecting for that.
Yeah, I can't really comment but wouldn't comment on things that are beyond my competence. I wasn't sort of like involved in human resources related research. The one sort of like somewhat relevant fact that I know is that the performance of teams in corporate settings, they have a very strong relationship to the average IQ of the group, and especially to the cognitive abilities of the smartest individual within that group. But specific tests which are the best at identifying workers, no, I'm just not familiar with the literature on that. Sorry.
Just one more as well. I guess there is like an AGI scenario where it comes reasonably fast, and maybe it sticks around and looks after us, and maybe in that world we're better off not being too smart, because we might be sad that there aren't any problems for us to solve or things for us that are worth learning because the AGI knows it all. So it might be better to be dumb and just kind of like run around partying and having fun.
Oh yeah, you have to make sure that the AGI, which will soon become an ASI if it's an AGI and thinks 1,000 times quicker, that it's sort of aligned and has like your human welfare in a sort of like list of priorities and things to optimize for. Because if it doesn't, then you're pretty screwed, especially if you're dumb. So.
I'm building an AI to interview general cognitive abilities, so maybe I can help solve your hiring issues, Tom, and maybe that eventually can help test people similar to IQ tests.
Awesome.
So, obviously, I want my descendants to be as intelligent as possible, but it is posited by many people that there's more than one type of intelligence, and I'm curious, would you envision branching out, as we understand intelligence is better, to select for multiple kinds of intelligence, or are you just not worried about selecting for one kind and letting the chips fall where they may for the other intelligences?
Yeah, I'm not sure you were here at the very beginning, but basically intelligence it's defined by the like all types of intelligence load on a common factor of intelligence called the G factor, the general factor of intelligence. So if you look at all the different cognitive tests that we know of, they all have a positive correlation with each other. So you can identify like that sort of like that G factor, and it's also the most palatable factor as well. And you also have some specific abilities, like some people are better at visual spatial tasks, so there's word cells. But the main thing is that there's a single measure of intelligence that classically describes what we think of as intelligence, that powers all the other types of intelligence. And the sort of like the main priority and most tactical really aspect would be to focus on maximizing that. Yep.
Is there any relationship between IQ and like EQ, so emotional intelligence?
Yes, there is a correlation. Yeah, I mean EQ is a subset of like of it. Yeah.
So it's positively
And,
correlated.
yeah. And I mean, obviously, another sort of thing I would sort of point out is that emotional intelligence. It's you can if you don't have like a high general intelligence and you also have a low emotional intelligence, then you're sort of like very antisocial. But even if you have a low EQ but a high IQ, then you can kind of block social relations and imitate them and actually have like a normal social life. So like even in this sort of like nano application, like having a high level of intelligence is again adaptive.
So I just wanted to mention that we're not like really trying to augment like intelligence, in the augmentation lab. I mean, or at least I mean, we're doing more like we're doing other parts of the body. I don't know, Neuralink and other people can go into the brain. I mean, but also, so I've heard that IQ tests may be inaccurate depending on like differences in culture, for example. It's some researchers think it's pretty heavily dependent on that, and some think that IQ tests like aren't terribly accurate. Do you have I know you kind of touched on that earlier, but do you have any take on on that?
Yeah, I do. So the G factor is a universal construct. They've tested non-Western cultures as well, like even sort of native cultures, and they have identified a general factor of intelligence that exists amongst them. The other sort of meta point I would like to make is that for the most part, modern culture is the main culture that matters is the world of cities, of word cells, of knowledge workers, and basically it's the main relevant sector that answers for the kinds of things we're interested in, such as learning a modern economy and producing innovation. So even in the event that IQ tests did suffer from these defects, I mean some do obviously, but you can adjust for them in various ways. But even if that was fully the case, the sorts of things that they test, such as reasoning ability and like word manipulation and so on, and logic, they would still be something that's of enormous interest and extremely relevant to the future of our civilization.
Thanks. Yeah, the question of culture comes up a lot, and if you want to prove it to yourself that there are culture-independent IQ tests out there, you can just Google Raven's progressive matrices, for example, which is a commonly used IQ test, which is simply pattern recognition. It's a bunch of squares with a certain pattern in it, and it doesn't matter what language you speak, what culture you come from, as long as you can see, you can analyze this pattern. And that test is actually one of the more accurate, or one of the most G-loaded, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, so what else should we do, like practically here? Oh, by the way, somebody said something about EQ, IQ trade-off. There is one exception, which is Asperger's, of course. Many of our friends have this, and so that's one exception. But generally speaking, I think IQ and EQ are positively correlated. Also, physical attractiveness. It's a weak correlation, unfortunately for many of us, but it's there, and it kind of makes sense because it's about biological development. If your development as an embryo or as you were growing went well, you had the nutrition, you had not too much mutation load, and you would turn out pretty well put together, as Mike Johnson says. Anyway, so what should we do first with NumaDAO? Are you doing a token pre-sale? I'd like to participate, and yeah, we should put together some kind of a pitch deck for exactly the type of things that the DAO would invest in.
Yeah, yeah, I have to get down to that. I haven't yet. It's sort of like putting the cart before the horse at this stage. I first sort of need to probably have a light paper out, a pitch deck that's more specifically oriented to it, and get a team on board. So still looking for people who are aligned on this mission. I think alignment is important in this case actually, and who can sort of like contribute like from either a scientific perspective or the tokenomics perspective or the propaganda perspective. And also, obviously, you need to get some seed funding for it as well, which is the main thing that I'll be presumably working on this March.
Great, all right, sign me up.
Just out of interest, how did you get like into this? Like what took you into intelligence enhancement and going this deep?
So I discovered Richard Lynn, who is a now deceased British psychologist who started systematically collating national IQ tests from around the world, like from the 1980s basically. And I noticed that the countries with lower average IQs seem to be systemically poorer, and than the other countries, and countries with high IQ were richer. I wasn't actually like super familiar with the literature at that point, but that pattern really stood out to me and seemed to have vastly more explanatory power, even at a very intuitive level, than any of the other explanations out there, such as institutions, which I've talked about, or another popular outlook, especially amongst left-wingers, is the legacy of colonialism. You have this theory called the golden billion, which is popular in the Soviet Union, Russia in particular, which is that there's this sort of like privileged caste of about 100 billion people in the developed world who are keeping everybody else down. But that didn't seem to make much sense to me, because how then did South Korea and Taiwan develop? Like they went originally in this sort of like privileged group of countries. So that kind of thing seemed pretty obvious to me from the first time I looked at those like national IQ databases, which I think was actually in the mid 2000s when I was 16, 17, 18, and that was when my interest in this and its sort of like application to economics began, I'd say.
Do you have a thesis as to why there is this geographical relationship between IQ and country? I mean, I've heard a theory that there are genes related to, I think, like openness and exploration, for example.
Yes.
And like given humans started in Africa and then migrated, there's potentially the people who were willing to take a risk and move to a new city,
Yes.
country, or like take a risk and walk 1,000 miles to try and find something better, have that variant, and so the further away you get from there, maybe there's this relationship.
Yeah, of course, there are different theories about this in the fields of evolutionary psychology. There's called Winter's theory, if you want to look it up. At the end of the day, the sort of like the human race split up 50,000 years ago, and it seems pretty unlikely that evolutionary pressure was acting exclusively below the neck, as the sort of the quip goes. But it's not sort of a topic that I think is advisable to stress in the concept of seeking money for intelligence enhancement, because it's obviously a controversial topic once you sort of like start digging into it for reasons that I think are obvious.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anatoly. One more round of applause.
Thank you.
There are already comments in the Intelligence Acceleration Telegram group. People want to know how to get involved, right?
Okay, sure.
People are keen.
Right.
We are keen.
So yeah, if you're interested, please write to me Karlin on Telegram. You can also do it on Twitter or whatever, and I can add you to the intelligence augmentation Telegram that we have here. Right. Thank you for enabling this, Veronica.
Thank you so much.